Good afternoon. I want to welcome everyone here today to our Learn at Lunch webinar. We will learn about the Oklahoma Quality Beef Network from OQBN Coordinator Paul Vining. If you have questions during today's presentation, please ask them through the chat window by clicking on the chat button at the bottom of the screen. We have more farm management resources available on the eFarm Management page. I will share this link in the chat window. Our next webinar on October 1st at noon will feature Daryl Peel providing a livestock market update. Paul, I will turn it over to you now.
Thank you, Brent. Thank y'all for having me. I'd like to say a quick thank you to any educators on the webinar that have helped verify OQBN calves, and I'd like to say a thank you to our excellent Ag Econ department at OSU, and anybody that's interested or in participating in the program or has participated in the program, thank you as well. So kind of with that, we'll get started. So this presentation, I want to begin by just talking a little bit about preconditioning and why it's important, and then we'll move into some of the economic benefits and explain kind of why those economic benefits are there. So I seem to be having a little bit of trouble advancing this. There we go. Okay, so preconditioning, just a brief explanation, kind of the definition of preconditioning. This began back in the 1960s. It came from two terms. There was a term being kicked around by veterinarians and cattlemen called pre-vaccinating. So that just was a term that referred to vaccinating those calves prior to shipping. And then there was also a term called conditioning, which referred to conditioning those calves. Those common conditioning practices were weaning, castrating, dehorning, deworming, bunk training, those sort of things. So these terms were combined to form the modern term preconditioning. So we hear preconditioning, kind of know what it is, but that's where it came from, and that's the background. So the goal of preconditioning is just simply to prepare those calves for the next phase of the beef supply chain. Preconditioning practices, just some quick preconditioning practices, kind of already mentioned, but weaning, that's usually for at least 45 days. Castrating, deworming, dehorning, bunk training, vaccination, and then those are just kind of the basic preconditioning practices. We want to keep that calf healthy. So kind of explaining why we need to precondition those calves. So calves are usually healthy prior to leaving the ranch of origin, and that's kind of what this graph on the left just explains. Don't get too lost in that graphic, but basically that orange line, that's that calf's immunity and resistance, and then that black line is the challenge to that calf's immune system prior to leaving the ranch of origin. So it's going to get passive immunity from the dam for about approximately 4 months, and those cattle, again, usually stay healthy prior to leaving the ranch of origin. So we're just trying to prepare those calves for the next phase of the beef supply chain once they leave the ranch of origin. So thinking about keeping those calves healthy, stress, we all hear about stress, and that's a major cause of calf illness, and just want to talk a little bit about how that works, and first give some examples of common calf stressors, things that we do to these calves prior to weaning, or at weaning and after weaning, or before weaning too. Castrating, dehorning, just the things that we kind of briefly went through. Shipping. So this is a good picture I like to include. You see this calf here. If you can see that calf kind of looking back at the camera, and that calf's just in a completely new environment. So that just kind of demonstrates how stressful shipping can be if you think about that animal entering somewhere it's never been, and just a complete new environment, stressful period. And then sale, that time of sale is stressful, going through the sale ring and then being commingled. And ultimately, this can all kind of lead to illness. It kind of manifests in when we get these snotty noses and things like that, just respiratory distress. So again, don't get too lost in this graphic as well. I just wanted to provide some kind of background on stress, and then kind of why it's not always a problem. So stress is a natural response. There's a little bit of, we need a little bit of stress to get out of bed in the morning. That's a kind of a basic stressor. Another example would be a newborn calf. When that cow licks that calf and wants it to stand up, she's providing a little bit of stress to make that calf stand up and nurse. So this graphic basically just along kind of the x-axis, that's amount of time, and then the y-axis, that's just the measure of that stress response. And you can see that spike, and then it goes back down to what we call adaptation. So this would be an example of a natural stressor, natural response, and then that animal completely adapts and there's no biological cost, and the animal remains healthy. What we run into if we don't precondition calves often is chronic stress, and this can be much worse. An example of chronic stress would be multiple stressors happening quickly. If you wean that calf from the dam, load it on a trailer, sell it, commingle it all in the same day, maybe you even castrate it that day or shortly before, whatever, dehorn it, and it's not completely healed. So those are multiple stressors at once. And that kind of is what this graph represents. Again, along the x-axis, that's just that time, just a time response. And then the y-axis is the overall response. And you can see that stress spike, and this will be multiple stressors causing a significant amount of stress, and then that animal never comes back down to baseline. It never completely adapts. So you're left with a decline in productivity and a biological cost. Again, this often manifests itself in a bovine respiratory disease, respiratory illness. So just a little bit about some of the common calf concerns, some things that we like to vaccinate against. We hear about a lot. Blackleg. So blackleg is a bacterial disease caused by Clostridium shoveii. That's the bacteria. There's several different strains of that bacteria that will cause this disease. So basically that animal will ingest that Clostridium shoveii when it's grazing, and then that bacteria will travel to the intestine and then through the intestinal walls and migrate to the spores, will migrate to the muscle, and then they'll remain dormant until there's some damage to that muscle. And then that can cause, once that bacteria is activated, it can cause necrosis and ultimately death. So blackleg is very easy to vaccinate against. It's the most inexpensive illness to vaccinate against. And usually when it's a problem, it's a big problem. There's usually multiple calves lost to blackleg. It's either not a problem or it's a significant problem. So very easy to protect against. Then we go into the bovine respiratory disease complex. So these are the respiratory illnesses. So the first four are viral components, and then the last one, Mannheimia hemolytica, is a bacterial component. So bovine respiratory disease occurs as it's a complex. So it's initiated by an initial viral infection and then a secondary bacterial infection by Mannheimia hemolytica, usually. And this is what ultimately causes mortality and morbidity, so sickness and death. So kind of what happens is that animal's stressed, and then it gets sick with one of these respiratory illnesses, IBR, BVD, BRSV, or PI3, and that compromises the immune system. That then allows Mannheimia hemolytica, which naturally lives in the animal's upper respiratory tract, the nasal and pharynx region, to then migrate to the lower respiratory tract and colonize the lungs. And then that can lead to some really serious problems and ultimately possible death. So these things are easy to vaccinate against. That's one of the, I guess, when we think about marketing, when we market these calves, we're marketing healthy animals, and that's what we really want to promote. So these are easy to vaccinate against. We have several different vaccination protocols, different options. So I'll just kind of talk about some of those options. I'll talk a little bit about killed versus modified live, and then when to vaccinate. So available vaccines on the right side of your screen, if you're looking at the screen, that's a blackleg vaccine. Ultrabac 7. Most of these blackleg vaccines will have a number in them. Ultrabac 7, Calvary 9, Covaxin 8, those kind of things. And those numbers just refer to the different strains of Clostridium shoviae that they protect against. So I don't know if one's better than the other. I'm not a veterinarian. We just recommend that you vaccinate against blackleg, and most of the common available vaccines seem to work pretty well. And on the right, that's just an example of a bovine respiratory disease vaccine. So just a respiratory vaccine. And you can see on the box, everything that it vaccinates against is listed. And it also covers Mannheimia. So a lot of these respiratory vaccines will cover everything. Some of them, they're all different. So some of them may not include Mannheimia. Some of them may not include BVD. So there's some different things to, so I kind of recommend if you're going to purchase one, just even if you don't know what all those big words mean, just look for the 4. Try to make sure it covers all 4. And then if you want to cover Mannheimia as well in one shot, look for that as well. If you want to give it as a separate shot, that's also an option. So there's some shots that just have Mannheimia. So killed versus modified live vaccines, this is probably one of the most frequently asked questions, and it's kind of ties back into marketing. We want to make sure that we keep those animals healthy, and those killed vaccines do a little bit better job at providing immunity. So we due to some different things, we recommend at least one round of a modified live vaccine. So just kind of breaking it down, the killed vaccine contains a killed antigen. So these vaccines work by introducing a weakened form of that virus to the animal. So these would be respiratory vaccines. So in a killed vaccine, those antigens are completely killed. And it's generally safe for pregnant cows because in pregnant cows, if with the modified live, they can possibly shed that BVD virus. So we like to recommend a killed vaccine if the cows have not been vaccinated with a killed vaccine, and those calves that you want to enroll in OQBN are still on the cow. That way that calf cannot shed that BVD to the cow. But once that calf's weaned, we require a modified live vaccine. So we always require a modified live booster because the calf's away from the cow and there's no risk of abortion in those pregnant cows. And again, those modified live vaccines contain weakened antigens, but they're still alive, so they provide a much more robust immune response. So when to vaccinate, I put these slides together to try to just give some options. We get a lot of questions about when to vaccinate. So option 1 would be providing both that respiratory and clostridial vaccine just prior to weaning. So that first time those calves are worked, that's usually around 4 months of age at branding. And then we will booster that calf at weaning. Option 2 would be to vaccinate just prior to weaning, just 4 to 6 weeks prior to weaning, and then provide that booster shot at weaning. And again, that first shot could be a killed, and then the second shot could be a modified live. If the cattle herd has a history of being vaccinated with modified live, it would be okay to go ahead and give that modified live at pre-weaning as well. Option 3 would be to give the initial vaccination at weaning and then booster 18 to 21 days, so 3 or 4 weeks post-weaning. And this option requires 2 rounds of modified live because that cow or that calf has been removed from the cow and there's no danger of shedding that virus, and the calf's older, and we just want to make sure and give it a robust immune response so that it's ready to go. So kind of moving into some of the reasons why these calves are more profitable. Again, we've kind of established like the health part that makes them more profitable, but why does that matter? Just wanted to dive into some of the data. So Preconditioned calves tend to gain, our research has shown that they gain a half pound to 3/4 of a pound more than non-preconditioned calves. So this would be similar calves. If they're preconditioned, then they're gonna gain a little bit better. Preconditioned calves had a 90% reduction in sickness, so that was a huge cost savings. And then healthy cattle are worth more money. So this data is a study that was done by Dr. Wilson at OSU a few years ago, but these weren't preconditioned calves necessarily, but these are just calves that kind of looking at health and carcass quality. So we've kind of established that preconditioning helps keep that calf healthy, and then that healthy carcass is worth more money, which makes these calves more valuable. So kind of along your x-axis, that's just the treatment frequency, how often these calves had to be treated in the feedlot for respiratory illness. And then the y-axis is how well they graded. And you can see that calves that were not treated graded much better than calves that had to be treated multiple times, once or multiple times. So kind of just bringing it home that medical treatment impacts profitability, right? We're having to put cost into labor and into medicine to treat those animals. So this is the same study by Dr. Wilson, just looked at the value, the total value of that healthy animal. And you can see that, again, along the x-axis, that's our treatment frequency, and then y-axis is cattle value. And you can see that those untreated cattle just were worth significantly more money. And again, these are 2017 prices, so they'd be a little bit different today, especially with the way prices are. But the point is, those cattle that weren't treated stayed healthier and were worth more money. So that's kind of what the goal of preconditioning is. Preconditioning practices improve animal health, which improves growth and performance, which improves overall animal value. So kind of diving into some branded preconditioning programs. That's what OQBN is. It's a branded preconditioning program. And this just allows us to do some additional advertising and have a similar protocol guidelines for all the calves so that the buyers know what they're getting. And the goal of this program is just kind of to drive profit through improved marketing throughout the state. So there's a lot of branded preconditioning calf programs. I like to highlight some of the other ones that are out there. A lot of the pharmaceutical companies have their own preconditioning programs. And then there's some other, like Integrity Beef is done by the Noble Foundation. I think it's changed a little bit. I don't know. It's kind of its own thing now, but Integrity Beef Alliance is something that's a little bit similar to OQBN, that their protocol is a little bit different. And a lot of breed associations, I didn't list all the breed associations, but there's most all the major breed associations have their own branded calf preconditioning program. So OQBN started as a collaborative effort between OSU Extension and then the Cattlemen's Association. It began around 2001. Again, our requirements, so I've talked a little, kind of just mentioned really briefly those general preconditioning requirements. These are the requirements that are specific to OQBN. We have our vaccination protocol, the 3 options that I previously mentioned. Calves have to be castrated, dehorned, weaned for at least 45 days. They can be weaned for more. A lot of guys, producers like to wean for additional days. We require BQA certification, and we kind of differentiate ourselves by requiring third-party verification. So that's a lot of what the educators are a lot of great help with that. Just going out to the producer, to the ranch, and then verifying that those calves have been through the protocol that we're saying they've been through. So it's just another layer of verification that's unique to OQBN and a lot of programs don't have. So kind of going into our price premiums, this is a graph that shows our average premiums since 2013, the past 10 years. So this is on a per hundredweight basis. So calves averaged, I apologize, that 13 right there should be a 14. I updated this yesterday. So over the past 10 years, it's actually $14.04 per hundredweight is what the OQBN calves have, the premium that they've received. And that's over similar calves in the same sales, similar non-weaned calves in the same sales as OQBN sales. So we have some great help from our extension economists, Dr. Peel and Dr. Raper, and they come out and take data and then put these comparisons together. But for kind of an example, if you had a 500-pound calf and it sold, I apologize, I should be $14, not 114. So $14 per hundredweight more. That would be 14 times 5. Basically, that's about $70 more per head, and that's just the premium that animal brought. So those are really good premiums. Premiums were really strong last year, even though because of the high prices, participation has decreased a little bit, but we're still seeing really good premiums and expect to continue to see that this year. To enroll in OQBN, if you want to participate or if you want to show somebody how to participate or just find more information, you can go to our webpage. This is a screenshot of that home webpage. Just Google OQBN. It usually pops up. At least for me, that may be because I search it a lot, but it comes up pretty easily. Then if you want to participate in OQBN, the process would first be to order ear tags. So you'll go to this page, navigate to this page from that home page, and you can purchase program ear tags. And just click on that link and it brings you to an order page like this. Tags are $2.50 a piece. And you go through and put some information in. And once your tags are ordered, it sends an email to me with the order. And then we package and ship your tags as quick as we can and contact an educator in your county, your nearest educator, ag educator, and they will set up a time to come out and verify those calves prior to sale. So that's the process. This is an updated sale schedule. So we've got some sales coming up. We sell at these different sale barns. New for this year, we're doing a online sale with Big Iron Auctions on November 19th. So that will be an online OQBN sale. So we're seeing if we can generate some interest for that. Our first sale of this year is coming up in November 5th at OKC West. And then we have some sales in the spring. We have a couple winter sales and then sales in the spring. The last OQBN sale of this sale season will be April 8th at McAllister. This is what the tags look like. So they're just a feedlot. They call them the feedlot tags. Just a Z tag. They have to have a Z tag tagger to put these in. The enrollment form. So when I ship those tags, I include the enrollment form. And this is just, again, to get your information, get everyone's information for those calves. And this will be sent back to me prior to sale. So we'll have that for the sale barn on sale day. And we'll be able to put together just a sale program kind of highlighting what we're selling that day. The vaccination record. So this is the example of a vaccination record, and we just like to get these in just prior to sale so that we're able to make sure that everything makes sense and that all the proper vaccinations were given at the proper time. The ranch verification checklist is that third party kind of provides that third party verification. So the educator will take this checklist out to the ranch and just go through it with the producer and make sure that all our protocol has been met. If there's any kind of discrepancy, we like to make sure we'll do our best to work through it prior to sale. So if we can get these done and get any kind of discrepancies figured out, we were pretty flexible and able to make a lot of changes before sale. So this is an example of a certificate. So we don't require that producers sell in a sanctioned OQBN sale. Those sanctioned sales allow us to do a little bit more marketing. And we market via social media. We're doing a social media campaign this year. And then, of course, through Sunup TV. So we do some Sunup segments, market through some that Cow-Calf Corner newsletter, put some articles in that Dr. Beck and Dr. Anyway, that gets sent out every week. So that's a weekly newsletter. We also market through the Oklahoma Cattlemen's Association. We place a one-page ad in the Oklahoma Cattleman that comes out in August. So we make sure and do that. And we also have flyers and banners at the sale barns. So we have some just canvas banners for the sale barns. But anyway, this is an example of a certificate that if they did not want to participate in a sanctioned sale, we can make them a certificate with all their information, and they can take it to any sale barn that they want to sell at and provide that with the sale barn manager, and they'll announce it when their calves come through that they've been through OQBN, and they'll probably announce days weaned and stuff like that. And that's all I had, and we can take questions. I had a few videos here. If they'll play, I'll just go through them quickly. They're just videos of OQBN calves selling at different sale barns. The first one is El Reno. I think Blackwell's in there, Southern Plains Livestock Auction. So just go through those really fast, give you a kind of an idea of some of the different types of cattle. We sell a lot of different types of calves and what they look like on sale day.
You being protocol and I'm being good horns.
You can see Dr. Peel and Dr. Raper sitting up there taking data too. And that's all I had, Brent. Sorry, I kind of went through that pretty quickly, but I had a lot of slides.
That's okay. That was perfect. Thank you very much, Paul. I did share a link to the OQBN page in the chat room as well. For anyone if they want to click on that and investigate, look at that page. So I've set it where people can unmute themselves to ask questions. You can ask questions as well of Paul through the chat window. Either way you're welcome to do. I also, while you're talking or while you're thinking of questions, I did share a webinar survey in the chat window. A link to that. It's a short survey to tell us how we're doing and how the webinars are going. And so that's very helpful to get your feedback from that. We also have another webinar scheduled. Our next one will be on October 1st at noon, and it will be a livestock market update from Dr. Darrell Peel. He's our extension livestock economist here in the OSU Ag Econ department. Well, Paul, I really don't see any questions. So thank you for presenting today. Thank you everyone for joining us. We hope to see you on October 1st, and I'm going to end the webinar now.